We are going to go ahead and get started, and I will let people in as they enter. So today our topic for this webinar is how do collections impact my credit? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Didn't have anyone say no, so I think we should be okay. Throughout this webinar, please feel free to ask questions. You can use the chat function or feel free to unmute yourself as well. That's definitely an okay option. And then you're also welcome to ask any additional questions at the end. Our goal is to make sure today that we're answering every question you have regarding collections, and we'll offer some opportunities at the end as well for questions outside of collection accounts if you have any burning questions you want to make sure are addressed. So today, before we go ahead and get into our topics, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ivory. I own Insight Strategies Credit Repair. Our primary focus is helping our clients to repair damaged credit or to also establish credit. So for those individuals who don't have a credit score that's been created, maybe from not using credit for quite a while or just being new to credit, we'll help to establish credit scores. So our company, by the end of 2021, was able to successfully remove just over 7,500, almost 7,600 negative items from our clients' credit reports. And our goal is to not just help people remove negative information, but really be a foundational support for understanding how credit works and creating a strong education around credit reporting. So that way, anyone as a consumer, whether they're our client or not, can be better established to be successful when it comes to their finances. So I spent over a decade working with some of the biggest banks in the country, where I managed adherence to laws and regulations for default, modifications, foreclosure, and the short sale processes. And in part of that was understanding all of the laws that revolve around credit, and then of course default. So this gives me special insight on how to work successfully with collection companies, creditors, and credit bureaus. And I'm also a licensed financial planner. So we take all of that in the way this business is established to make sure we can give our clients a really strong, like I said, financial education and education around credit. So today's agenda. So we're going to start with talking about what a collection is. Then we're going to move into how it fits into the credit score algorithm, so you know how it's really impacting you if you do have a collection on your credit report. Then we're going to move into what your consumer rights are when it comes to collection accounts, and then understanding how a collection agency may behave, whether it's legal or illegal, and how to effectively handle that if you're encountering a situation such as that. So again, we'll just jump right into it. So what is a collection? A creditor may transfer your account to a collection agency to collect on behalf of that creditor or to sell it to a debt buyer. So what happens before that debt is sold or collected on? Let's say you have a credit card or really any type of consumer debt, and it goes unpaid for a certain period of time. For most types of accounts, this is about 120 days. So typically after 120 days, sometimes up to 180 days, that original creditor may consider that debt as a loss and transition it to a collection account. Really what that means is you now no longer have the opportunity to catch that account up to a current status and keep that account open. Now, whatever that balance is, plus fees like late charges or any other fees they may have assessed, are due in full at that point. So a creditor could choose to then sell that account to a third-party debt collector, or they could collect on it internally. And many creditors for a time will choose to try to collect on the account internally before turning that account over to a third-party debt collector. So third-party debt collectors come in two forms. And those forms are a debt buyer, listed here. So a debt buyer is purchasing that debt, meaning that original creditor no longer owns that debt. They have sold it, typically for pennies on the dollar. They're just trying to make a profit because at this point, their assumption is that that consumer is no longer going to be willing to pay that debt, and they want to make some money on it. A debt buyer does not have to report to the credit bureaus. So it is the choice of that debt buyer or that third-party collection agency to report to the bureaus. It's something that they pay for. Often they will choose to report to at least one credit bureau, and they have to pay separately for each bureau. So often they'll choose to report to at least one bureau because it's motivation for that consumer to pay, right? There's some sort of a negative impact to the consumer, causing them to want to take action to resolve the issue. So the second type of collection agency is a third-party collection agency that's collecting on behalf of that original creditor. This means they don't own the debt. That creditor may have just hired that agency to collect on behalf of the creditor. So they're essentially paying for them to reach out to you as a consumer, whether that's in writing or by phone calls, by email, text messages, to try to gain, be collected off, right? So in that case, that creditor still owns that debt. They are in possession of that debt. And the way it's reflected on the credit report is with that original creditor. So collection accounts can occur for all sorts of different types of debt. Any consumer debt, so this is your traditional accounts we tend to think of, right? And something like a credit card, which we talked about, or any type of personal loan, any debt that you have, right? You have a contract with a creditor and you didn't pay it. You may see collections for evictions. You may see repossessions on your credit report that are eventually sold to a third-party collection agency. Unpaid medical bills, utility bills, cell phone bills, unpaid insurance. So this could be any type of insurance that you're paying for. It could be your auto insurance, renter's insurance, parking tickets or city fines. We've also seen things like overpayments for Social Security or unemployment. Let's say they gave you too much and they're asking for the money back, or other public services. So where do collections fit into your credit score calculation? So as I've highlighted here, they're going to fit into payment history. Payment history is 35% of your credit score, and we're talking about our FICO credit score. And that is the overall biggest factor contributing to your credit score, is that payment history. So when it comes to a collection, it can have a pretty dramatic impact to your credit report, especially if you're someone that has a history of a lot of on-time payments and maybe no collections in the past or very little collections in the past. So it can be pretty damaging, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And then again, I'm happy to answer any other questions you have as well. So it's important to understand how long a collection will stay on your credit report. So I want you to ask questions if this doesn't make sense, because this is a very important piece. A collection will stay on your credit report for 7 years from the original delinquency date of the original debt, or the date of the first missed payment, after which the account was no longer brought current. So it's very wordy. So I'm going to explain that with some examples below. So down here, this very first example, we see a 30-day late payment in January. So this is the first late payment. February, the account continued to go further delinquent to 60 days, then 90 days in March. April, there was a payment made, bringing it back down to 60 days past due. And then in May, it went back up to 90 days, June, 120 days late, and in July, that creditor charged the account off. So what date are we using in this case to count the 7 years, right? Where do we start counting 7 years from? In this case, it would be January. This is the first date of delinquency. So when a third-party collection agency, let's say it's purchased by one, that third-party collection agency purchases that debt from the creditor, it will fall off the credit report 7 years from this January 30-day late mark, not from 7 years from when that debt purchaser bought the debt from this creditor. So let's look at another example. In this case, we see, again, 30 days late in January, February, 60 days late, March, 90 days late, April, the account was brought current, and then in May, we started going past due again with a 30-day late in May, 60-day in June, 90-day in July, August 120, and it's in September, this account was charged off in this example. So in this case, 7 years from May is when this account would fall off the credit report. And that is, again, simply because the account was brought current in April. So this is the original delinquency date, right? Because we brought the account current. So I hope that makes sense. We're basing everything off of when the original creditor delinquency occurred, not when a collection company purchased the debt, regardless of if it has been sold to multiple collection agencies, meaning creditor A sold the account to collection agency, let's say Solverity, and Solverity then sold it to Alpine Credit Collections. Alpine Credit doesn't get a restart that 7-year process. It starts from that original date of delinquency. So why I bring this up is it's very important to understand when you're looking at your credit report, if you know that you have an account on your credit report that is beyond that 7 days, then, or 7 days, excuse me, beyond that 7 years, then it should no longer be on your credit. So what do you do about that? That's when you would go through the process of working to get that removed. That process can be quite complicated. You'd want to contact the credit bureaus or the collection agency, and this is something we specialize in. So if you have questions in how exactly to go about that, that's something we can handle for you or help you figure out. All right. So now that we've talked about how long a negative account stays on your credit report, and again, negative account being a collection charge off any negative account, any negative information at all. Let's talk about the different types of FICO models. So we discussed how payment history is 35% of your credit score. What's important to be aware of is that you don't have just one credit score. You have multiple credit scores. So what does this really mean? And before I get into what you're seeing here on the screen, I want to first go into FICO scoring versus Vantage scoring. A Vantage credit score is a credit score that was created in 2006. It was created by the bureaus, and it's the credit score you most commonly see when you try to get a free credit report from websites like Credit Sesame or Credit Karma, and there's many other websites out there. Those just tend to be the most common, the ones that people are most familiar with. So I bring those up for this example. That credit algorithm functions completely different than any FICO algorithm. Why that is so important is because a Vantage credit score is not used to qualify consumers for any type of debt, whether it's a credit card, an auto loan, a mortgage, personal loan. No debt is, no qualifications for credit use a Vantage credit score at this point. So it's important that when you are trying to determine what your credit score is and what's the impact from having a collection account on your credit report truly is to you as a consumer and to your score, that you're using a FICO score. But then the question comes to be as well, if there are so many versions of FICO as we see here, how do I know what FICO score matters the most? And that's going to be down to what type of debt you're applying for. So I want to give some examples about how a collection is viewed within these different type of FICO scores. What's most commonly used now across industries is FICO version 8. So typically when you're going to get an auto loan or a credit card, a personal loan, they're typically using FICO 8. Now, there are industry-specific versions of FICO, as you see here. That's what this is highlighting, versions used in auto lending, versions using credit card decisioning. And notice it says auto score 8 or bank card score 8. So a FICO credit score is essentially a risk management tool. Your score is saying, what is the likelihood that I am not going to satisfy this obligation, or I'm going to be delinquent or not pay on time for this type of debt, right? That's what this industry-specific version is saying, is what's my history in paying other installment debt or other auto loans? What's my history in paying credit cards on time. So it's really just zeroing in on that type of credit and really heavily focusing there. So if you were a person, let's say, that has had several charged off credit cards, but you always paid your auto loans on time, you may have quite a bit lower of a bank card score 8 than you do an auto score 8. So when it comes to mortgage lending, it's a bit different. Mortgage lending doesn't have an industry-specific FICO score, but what it does do is use an older version of FICO. So for Experian, that's FICO score 2, Equifax FICO score 5, and TransUnion FICO score 4. Why this is so very important is the way that collections are looked at between the different versions of FICO. So in older versions of FICO, like 2, 5, and 4, collection accounts are deemed negative to your credit score, whether paid or not. Doesn't matter if they're paid, doesn't matter the balance of the collection, if it was a $2 collection or a $5,000 collection. They're all deemed equally negative. With FICO scores 8, 9, or 10, collections less than $100 are ignored. And in FICO 8, it's a bit more complicated. It's not like an across the board, they're all ignored. On FICO 9 and 10, medical collections with a balance are still considered negative, but have a lesser impact than FICO 8. So what does that mean? That means if you have a medical collection and you pay it on 9 or 10, you're going to see a positive impact to your credit score. If you have a medical collection with FICO 8 and you pay it, it's still going to have a negative impact, just not as severe as the older versions of FICO 2, 4, 5, 6, etc. One call out I do want to make is FICO score 9 and 10 aren't really being used widely at this point. 10 isn't even on this chart, it's so new. Most of what we're seeing right now is FICO 8 being used. So we don't know yet when they'll start using the newer versions of FICO. But when it does come to mortgage lending, if you're someone that is looking to purchase a home, if you pay your collection, just know that is going to have no positive impact on these older versions of FICO. Absolutely no positive impact. And it may not be the best course of action. And there are better options, and that's part of what we're here for today and what we'll talk about as well. So let's go ahead and we'll move on if there are no questions about the FICO algorithms at this point. Something important to keep in mind when it comes to collection debt is there are what is called statute of limitations. These statutes of limitations are completely different than how long a collection can report on your credit report. A statute of limitation essentially determines how long a collection agency or a creditor can come after you legally for a debt. And really what that means is they have the ability to file a judgment or garnish your wages. So the courts are not going to allow a creditor or a collection agency to come after you legally if your debt is outside of that time bar that's defined by the statute. Now, that time bar or that statute of limitation is completely different, not completely, but can be different depending on the state that you live in, and can be different for different types of debt. So it's really important to know that piece of the law, or at least look it up. It's very easily accessible information that you can find online, or you can work with a credit professional, or of course an attorney as well. And if you do feel that, or if you know that you are being sued for a debt or a judgment is being placed against you, or garnishment, whatever type of legal action is being taken against you for a debt that is beyond that statute of limitations, it's extremely important to consult an attorney. You don't need to pay something you don't owe. You have rights as a consumer, and that attorney may be able to help you navigating that situation. And perhaps you may be able to be awarded money from that situation as well. So again, statutes of limitations are different than the 7 years an item can report on your credit report. Now we'll go ahead and we'll switch gears into the topic of paying collections. So I'm going to go into this a little bit further. We talked about the different versions of FICO. So again, versions 9 or 10, you will typically see a score increase if you pay a collection, primarily. Score 8, it's iffy in some cases, right? But it's going to be minimal as compared to score versions 9 and 10. When you pay a collection, it's going to show up on your credit report as paid in full or settled. Settled simply means you may have settled for less than that full balance. A paid collection will remain on your credit report for 7 years still. This is extremely important. Most individuals I speak with think that when they pay that collection, it will fall off their credit report. Unfortunately, that is not the case. A paid collection is still there. It's still going to impact your credit negatively, especially like I said, with the current versions of FICO being used today. The good news is as a collection ages in the newer versions of FICO, it is going to be less impactful to your score. That's not necessarily going to be true for the oldest versions of FICO. It also can lower your credit score by updating some of the dates on there. And we're going to talk about when that happens and whether that is legal. So we'll talk about that in more detail. So I'm going to save diving into that topic till a little bit later. If you are someone that has not had a collection on your report, you have a very clean credit report with nothing negative on it, and all of a sudden a collection pops up. Let's say it's Comcast. That tends to be one that gets people that have never had a collection, or a cell phone bill, a utility bill. Oftentimes these are billing errors. It can affect your credit score as much as 110 points, depending on the amount of negative information on your report. So really what that means is if you're someone with no negative history, you may get this big wham to your score. Now, if you're someone who has a history of negative accounts, and if you're someone who has quite a bit of history of negative accounts, a new collection may not wipe out your score. It may not cause a significant drop in your credit score because you already have negative history that's impacting you. So it's not deemed, how do I want to say? It's not abnormal behavior when the algorithm is looking at your prior history. So something to keep in mind. I want to talk next about validation, because let's say you are someone that has a collection on your credit report. You don't know what to do. Now what? What next? And it looks like, what next? So if you have a collection on your credit report, I urge you to pause before you act and really assess the situation. If you didn't know you had a collection on your credit report and you got a phone call from a collection agency, don't just rush to paying it right there. The best thing to do at that point is get proof of that debt. That would be validation. So what is validation? Validation is essentially that collection agency providing you proof that you owe that debt, and they need to verify the debt is yours and confirm that you have not already paid the debt, prove that debt is real. So what is supposed to happen is when a collection agency purchases a debt, they're required to send you a letter notifying you that they have obtained this debt, that this is the debt. And it needs to be within the first 5 days of either them communicating to you. Let's say they called you 5 days from that date, they need to send you that letter, or they obtained the debt. So you have 30 days at that point to request validation. When you request validation, it must be in writing. The law does not protect you if you request that validation over the phone. It does need to be in writing. And there isn't a set time limit to which a debt collector has to provide you that validation. So that means they could take, 30 days, they could take 6 months to provide you with that validation. The key is they cannot try and collect on that debt until they validate it. So their response to you may be silence. So what do you do if they don't respond, right? What do you do if they just ignore you? They just leave it on your credit report, and they may be just hoping that they can stall as long as possible, and you'll call them and want to pay it. But it's best in those situations to speak with a professional about what the most appropriate course of action at that point is. Oftentimes we will, with our clients, go directly to the bureaus and work through a process at that point, asking how the bureaus were able to prove that it should be on the credit report. And that in and of itself is longer than I'll get into here today. So if a debt collector does not have sufficient proof of the debt, they're no longer allowed to continue to pursue the debt. And that includes keeping the debt on your credit report. And like I said, with the bureaus, you can talk to the bureaus, and we do this all in writing, of course, and say that the debt has not been adequately validated. So most people don't know quite how to go about that process or what pieces of the law to be referencing. And where we find a lot of consumers get stuck is when the bureaus ignore them. And recently there was an article that had came out that the bureaus replied to 2% of disputes during the COVID pandemic. They get an average of 30,000 letters a day. So they get quite a bit. So 2% is a teeny tiny bit of the disputes that they've received. So it's important to know when to seek a professional if you're hitting a brick wall and you don't know what to do, and don't feel like you are now just forced to pay something because you feel stuck. So what should you do if a debt collector calls you? So if you just ignore them, and it's something many people will do, just know that they may call you five times per day per number that you have. If you're comfortable, it's a good idea to find out why they're calling. Perhaps they're trying to reach someone that isn't you. Or trying to collect on something that isn't yours. And if you're armed with information, especially if you've never gotten a letter in the mail and it's not something on your credit report, that allows you to act. So if you don't know what it is, you can't formulate a plan for your best course of action at that point. So oftentimes they're going to try to get you to be the one that answers their questions, but flip it on them. Treat it like an interview. Ask them who they are. You want to get their the representative's name. Jot down as much information as you possibly can, even if it seems minuscule. The date they called, the time, what number they called you from, the company name, the representative's name. Ask them why they're calling. Ask them how they got your number. Tell them you're not refusing to pay, but you want to know what they'll do if you don't pay. And this, in a way, is seeing if they're going to threaten you, right? Because they cannot legally threaten you. So you are legally entitled to know why someone is trying to contact you. So don't let them con you into making a payment right there over the phone. It is, always tell them that you want proof in writing. So you want to obtain, like I said, the company and representative's name, but also get their mailing address. And from there is when you can contact them and request that validation. So some of the dirty tricks that we see collection companies use against consumers is re-aging. So as you get closer to that 7-year time frame to which a debt will automatically fall off of your credit report, like I said, they know you're going to lose that motivation to pay. So they want to use different tactics to try to keep things on your credit report. They also know that you're more motivated when it's on your credit report because it impacts your ability to finance, right? They really have you cornered at that point. So anything they can do to keep that leverage on you, they're going to do. So re-aging is when they change an account number, change the dollar amount slightly. So they can tell the credit bureau that instead of that major delinquency happening, let's say in 2012, it happened in 2016, right? When they changed that information on your credit report. It's not legal, right? They're not allowed to do that. It cannot stay on your report longer than the 7 years, but they're going to change little things on the report so they can slide under the radar of the bureaus. Another thing we've seen are debt collectors often selling the debt once they get close to that 7-year time frame, and then that new collection agency, when they choose to report it to the bureaus, they're changing the date to the date that they purchased the debt rather than the date that the delinquency occurred, right? So now it looks like it can report for 7 years from that newly opened date. Again, not the case. So it's important to first be able to identify what is incorrect on your report so you know when you can take action and protect yourself. So during the pandemic, we've seen a rise of all sorts of different scams. And debt collection is another area where we've been seeing a lot of scams occur. Specifically, our client base has seen the scam quite a bit, but it's happening all over the country. It's recently been seen quite a bit with unsecured loans like payday loans. So the scammers are calling and claiming they're an officer or a commissioner. They make up some title that is vague, but sounds scary at the same time. They often threaten some sort of like legal action. So they'll say, you took out a loan in this year and you owe this much money. They may threaten calling your job, having you arrested, suing you, garnishing your wages, showing up at your house. And if you ask any questions, they often say that you've lost all of that time to ask questions and you had the opportunity. And what they're really trying to do is create this sense of urgency. And their threat is so out of the blue and it's so outrageous that you feel like it must be true. Nobody calls and says these types of things to you. Sometimes they'll say they'll seize your assets even. So the whole design is to shock and surprise you. And then you are panicking because you want to solve this issue, especially if you had all these big financial goals. Let's say you're trying to get ready to buy a house and you've been saving, and now everything could poof, be gone because of what they're threatening. So they're really stoking on that fear. And then they're going to circle back after that fear and they're going to say, well, don't worry, we can solve this if you just pay right now. So now they're giving you a solution and they're telling you the benefit of that solution. If you just pay, then none of this is going to happen. So if you receive a call like this, oftentimes if you don't question them back or you don't put them on their toes, they may keep trying to call, keep trying to contact you. So what do you do? The scams, first of all, are changing over time. So no, it may not fit this exact scenario, right? As they uncover people catching on to things, they're going to adjust things. So if anyone calls and threatens you, you can tell them you don't know who they are. Again, ask them the name of their company, ask them their mailing address, tell them to send you a letter regarding the debt that they're claiming you owe. When they give you their company name, if they do, oftentimes it's going to be vague. It'll be like Bureau of Investigation, like I have listed here, or it'll be legal or some weird acronym that stands for like IRS, CIA, but it's not the right acronym. They may say they can't give out that information because of privacy concerns. That's absolutely not true. The privacy is on your side, not on their side. They're obligated to give you that information. They may say it's too late to send a letter. The reason they do this is because of mail fraud. So if they were to send you a letter and they would be committing mail fraud, right? They're not going to want to do that. They're going to do anything they can to avoid that. So they may say, well, why don't we email you, or I could fax it to you. Don't accept that. Say you want a written letter in the mail. Often they're buying your information on the dark web. That's where they get your information, and that's where they know that you perhaps had some sort of a loan. So if it is a loan you recognize, but you know you paid it, you know it wasn't a collection, so it seems more true, it's often because they bought your information. So if you have some sort of credit monitoring, the one we use for our clients, has dark web monitoring, so you can be alerted if your information is basically used, sold on the dark web. Then you can put the proper alerts on your credit report. A real company will send you a letter. So remember that a real company will send you a letter. If it is a debt that you owe, they will send you a letter notifying you of that debt. So that's one of the more important things to keep in mind. That's all I had for the prepared remarks today regarding collections. I want to open the floor for any questions. And if you have questions you're not comfortable asking here on the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reply to the email for this webinar, type your email in chat, and then I will also be contacting you after the webinar as well, so you can feel free to reply to that too. So any questions? Okay. Feel free to use the questions and type in chat for questions too. I see you said your mic. Okay, go ahead. I am just waiting for the one question being typed, so bear with me. If a call is made to the collection company, like from you to the, oh, if a call is made to the collection company, does it revive the date? So no, everything is tied to that date of original delinquency. So no, it doesn't revive that date by any means. So credit reporting, it's one of those things where collection companies are going to try to see what they can get away with. When it comes to how information is put on the bureaus, it's all through data feeds, right? So if they can send certain data through and it meets the requirements of the bureau's algorithms where it's looking at things, then it's going to make it on the credit report. The only way something is going to be questioned is if you, the consumer, are posing the question. You essentially have to audit your own credit reporting or have a professional audit your reporting for you. So why does it show this month? Why does it show reported this month on collections if it was reported years ago? So you want to look at the open date, not the reported date. So the reported date is going to be when information is sent from that collection company, creditor, essentially that data furnisher, to the credit bureaus. So it's technically supposed to be reported every single month. If it's not reported every single month, that is one type of violation, albeit not necessarily the most impactful type of violation. But there are so many little pieces to how information is supposed to be reported on when it comes to your credit report, that about 70 to 80% of credit reports have some sort of error or some sort of an issue with the information on there. And often what you will see is the information on Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion does not match. It's not consistent. And according to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the information on your report must be accurate and complete. So one can argue inconsistencies do not create accuracies. But then it comes down to, do you know which inconsistencies are going to get you the results that you want? So hopefully that gives a little bit more insight as well. So hopefully that helps. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions after this, or if you would like to meet, more than happy to. Otherwise, a pleasure chatting with you today about collections. Stay tuned for some more webinars. We have them a minimum of twice a month, 2 to 4 times a month over different topics. Thank you, everyone.